Alright, hello. Thank you for checking this out. More than anything, this is a writing exercise for me. I imagine if you spend much time on YouTube, you've seen the thumbnails at least of things like rewriting the ending of Game of Thrones, or finishing the Song of Ice and Fire series, or patching up the world building in things like Harry Potter, things like that. But in the case of Tamara Pierce, while she does have several complete series and the world building was ever deeper and more responsive the more she wrote, for this video I am going to go through the Immortals series, restructuring it from a quartet to a trilogy. Although Song of the Lioness was Tamara Pierce's debut series and The Immortals is in some ways stronger as a reflection of her experience as a writer, it still suffers, I think, from straddling a middle grade young adult spectrum over the course of the series that also wedges in an age gap teacher-student romance in the last book or half of the third book as well, maybe. I want to say this series is perfectly solid on its own, mostly due to the characterization and tone of the stories. There is very little dialogue that my outline is trying to modify, and any of the things that I change around characterization is really just intended to highlight what is already there. And before I go any further, spoiler warnings for the Immortals series published in the 90s and in general for Tamara Pierce's writing and the Tortallin-based series. While this whole thing will make the most sense if you have read the Immortals series, especially if you've recently read or reread them, but I will be summarizing the original plot along the way that strings together the parts that I'm restructuring. So if you want to listen along for a series that you haven't read yet, you can do that here. I had two main inspirations for going ahead to do this restructure outline for the Immortals. One is I just don't feel like Realms of the Gods fits with the first three books, and I don't think I'm alone in that sense. And number two, this is justice for Miri. If you don't know what I mean, I will explain when we get to Miri. A last point before I go into the details of this restructured outline. If you loved the Immortals and you wish you could share it with your kids or a younger generation, but the age gap part makes you unwilling to share it, I have come up with 4 very easy modifications. You don't really have to do them physically to the book. You can just remind your brain that this is what canon is instead. Number 1, this is something that people already do, is just age up Dane. You can give 2, 3, or 4 years, and because she is a mature character with juvenile tendencies, it works without breaking the story. You just age her up a couple of years. Number 2, accept that Numair is a liar. He's actually 24 when Dane and he meet. That still makes an age gap, but it puts them within 10 years of each other. I have seen posts, but I have not actually read the word from Tamara Pierce that Numair just lied so much about his age that somehow he actually forgot that he's not as old as he says. Number 3, cross out every instance of magelet and replace it with wild mage. It is amazing how much less creepy Numair becomes just by calling Dane wild mage instead. Whether it's tender or sarcastic or respectful, magelet absolutely never is respectful. It's affectionate at best, and when he's in a temper, it becomes demeaning. That's my read, at least. Dane even says at one point that she doesn't really like the pet name, but she just accepts it like she does many other things. But number 4 is to cross out at least every other instance of calling Dane the girl in books 3 and 4, and replacing it with Dane or she, or something not the girl. It bothers me that the only character who in text actually regards Dane as a young woman is Ozorn. And as I did this reread and went that deeply into the text and what was bothering me about it or what could make it less bothersome, I'm starting to think I might have to do a kind of apology video to Melting Stones, but we'll see about that. And all 4 of those points that I just said apply to this restructure going forward. The problem that I see with Realms of the Gods is mainly in the fact that the battle between the goddess of chaos and the other great gods is completely absent from the first 3 books, and all of the foreshadowing in those books really just point to Karthak and Ozorn. As I went through my reread of the Immortals, I was beginning to think, because I'm looking for the chaos elements in the first, second, and third book before I get to the 4th book, I'm not seeing it, and so by the time I get to the 4th book, my thought is, can this literally be cut completely? It is a good thing that I read Tempest and Slaughter before I went through with that basis for this restructure, because yes, actually, the chaos elements are critically important to the entire structure of the gods and the way the world works around Tortall. The chaos elements need to be scattered more and made clearer through book 1 and 2, and book 3 will receive the largest load of the action from the back third of Realms of the Gods. This is not a rewrite or a fan fiction. I don't think Tamara Pierce's work genuinely needs to be rewritten, but I am of the opinion, as I said, that a version of this with an aged up Dane as a trilogy would be a stronger story, with the chaos elements scattered throughout and the romance elements brought up more consistently throughout. So follow along with this restructure and let me know your thoughts at the end. Starting with wild magic, this one, perhaps unsurprisingly, would change the least. First, Anua is the horse mistress of the Queen's Riders. She meets Dane, she questions her, and she uses her truth powder, and this time it can confirm that Dane is in fact 15, despite looking younger, looking underfed, having a more compact build overall. Anua hires Dane on. Those two, plus Anua's dog, Tahoe, travel south from Gala, the country where Dane originates, headed toward the capital of Tortall, managing about 30 ponies to be delivered to the Queen's Riders, who are military irregulars, and their summer training is ready to begin. These two get to know each other, Dane demonstrates she's a good archer, and world building is established. At the end of chapter 1, the first male badger god finds Dane and leaves her a claw, one of his claws, so he can track her down. Some dialogue can be added from him along the lines of, "There's too much chaos moving around these days for a girl like you to be wandering around unprotected." He doesn't have to tell her here that her father is a god, which is something that Dane has not known. Her mother has told her nothing, and now her mother is gone. But I am 0% invested in that fact of her god parentage being kept a mystery, so this is going to be more towards Dane's gradual acceptance of the fact and what that could mean for her. Chapter 2. They cross into Tortall and officially leave Dane's past behind, although she is haunted by when she thinks she went crazy after her mother's death. She doesn't want to tell Anua exactly what happened and lose her respect or trust. Then one morning, they cross with a handful of Stormwings that are chasing a hawk. A brief battle occurs, birds rise up to fight for Dane, some are injured or killed, and after the battle, a surge of healing magic is yanked through Dane, causing her to pass out briefly but bringing back all the injured birds. Anua witnesses this. Dane then goes to find the hawk that the Stormwings were hunting. This fight was led by Stormwing Queen Jaina Bitterclaws, and I wouldn't change the interactions with her and the Stormwings throughout this book. They establish a prejudice for Dane and they introduce a scary new immortal creature. I would, however, increase the occurrence of other Immortals interactions and reports, because in this version, the deterioration of the barrier wall is going to be accelerated. The barrier wall is a mage-made barrier that is 400 or 500 years old that separated all of the Immortals, or pushed all of the Immortals into the divine realms and locked them out of the mortal realms. Somebody discovered the spells and has been opening portals, so they're starting to cross over where people no longer believe they exist and certainly are not prepared to deal with them anymore at this point. The so-called Immortals War, as it is named in Kell's series Protector of the Small, can be protracted to cover all of the early years and conflicts with the Immortals moving into the mortal realms, or shortened to signify only the major battle event to be outlined when we get to Emperor Mage Book 3. There's 3 major facts that need to occur out of the Immortals War. 1, Duke Barry loses his oldest sons. 2, Kell's brother is disabled. And 3, Lord Wilden protects the youngest princesses and princes, taking wounds and earning King Jonathan's debt of gratitude. The Badger God had given Dane advice to focus and listen, essentially, and that would enable her to hear or find any of the animals if she wanted to. So she uses that now and finds the hawk, but she immediately knows he's not a normal hawk, and after a couple of days, it becomes clear that he will die without help. Anua uses magic to call for help, and help arrives in the form of the Lioness. With a company of the King's Own, they are headed to charge the local lord with treason unless he's got a good explanation of why he's dealing with Carthag. With Alana's guidance, Dane is able to guide Numair back to his human form, which Dane did not expect. Into chapter 3, a couple of Spydrins nearly get the drop on Dane and Alana, but each of them kill one. Alana points out her ember pendant, her token from the Great Mother Goddess, and although she doesn't need to explain that part of it, more reader attention needs to be drawn to it to make a clear parallel with something later in book 3. In this moment, Dane can even touch her own god token, the badger's silver claw, hanging from a leather cord. Later on, when Alana thanks Dane for fighting Spydrons with her and for saving Numair, she labels him as, she says that he is one of her best friends. We are never given any indication of what brought them together. We just have to assume magic and proximity to John. So this can be improved with the simplest dialogue line. He reminds me of my brother, my twin brother even. He's like a brother, something like that. A line or two more can give Dane or a reader a clue for how Alana and Numair met or what they connected over early on, besides having powerful magic and knowing the king. Something specific to attach to. The next day, Alana, in the company of the King's Own, continue on to Lord Cynthia and leave Numair with Anua and Dane to finish his recovery. Numair, in his first conversation with Dane, brings up magic and unintentionally offends her. He could call her 13 here instead of later on as originally in the book and be corrected to his face by Anua, she's 15. This serves as a direct check to him, and the reader can judge his subsequent action from here. In Realms of the Gods, Numair himself says it's the easiest, basest crime for a grown man to deceive a young woman to thinking she loves him and he loves her. Well, this awareness can be moved right to this first conversation with him. And Dane has been recently traumatized by loss and is deeply grieving. She needs safety, and Numair, through dialogue with Anua, can make it clear that he's aware of that, and he'll be mindful that he doesn't unintentionally mislead Dane. Anua can add something like, I know you are too honorable to ever take advantage of a young woman in Dane's position. Not everyone knows you like I do. To which Numair can say, you're right. Dane's pony, Cloud, is a wonderful character, and she should call Dane Hoof Sister at some point or something like that. She isn't Dane's horse, she's her only family that's left. Both she and Dane should have a more blurred understanding of how that doesn't make sense from an outsider's perspective. That Dane forgets other people don't see Cloud as a person, that Cloud forgets Dane isn't actually a horse trapped in a two-legger body. This next part is taken from the Realms of the Gods, disconnecting the appearance of the Tauros from Ozorn. This creature wanders through a portal that is open for other purposes somewhere near Lord Cynthia. A Tauros is a mostly human male body with the upper shoulders and head of a bull, the body being proportionate to have that. I think it possibly also has hoofed feet. I don't remember that without double checking though. And its sole purpose is to attack women. These creatures were born of women's fear of assault, and so here, Numair and Anua are meditating for the first time that Dane has seen, and she's gone fishing, and this Tauros has found her there alone. Dane flashes back in Realms of the Gods to her ma and her granda back home. This is now projected to her two new friends who are, as far as she knows, vulnerable and unaware. She fights and kills the Tauros the same way with a makeshift sling and a few rocks, and this brings her trauma much closer and much sooner than in the original. Anua and Numair could have protected themselves and Dane if she had run to them, and it shows them, more than they already knew, how viciously capable but also how vulnerable Dane is. Soon after that, Dane asks what their meditation that they're doing is, and Anua and Numair invite her to practice with them. When Alana and the King's Own catch up, Anua and Numair can tell her about the encounter with the Tauros, and Alana can report that they had encountered something like a chaos vent, only they don't know yet that's what it was. Luckily, Alana is powerful enough, she could send it away, essentially, and they just think it was some kind of bizarre trap that Cynthia set to cover his escape. The chapter ends with the group arriving at Chorus and the training compound of the Queen's Riders. Chapter 4 begins with Anua having a conversation with Dane about her employment circumstances going forward with the Queen's Riders. I think Anua would be comfortable enough with Dane at this point that she has the choice to admit her own past trauma, that she was beaten and abandoned by her husband, and how working with the Riders has allowed those scars to fade. I do not like that originally a random character we never met before and who never matters again being the one to tell Dane about Anua's experience with domestic violence. This is the only character that I am completely excising from the restructure, besides anyone who appears only in Realms of the Gods. Next, Burry from Song of the Lioness and Sarge from Tempest and Slaughter come and talk to Anawa and meet Dane. Dane goes away to go see the horses in their pasture, where she meets the queen, Thayet, the best monarch in the southern and eastern lands, and then follows Thayet to the mess hall, where we meet Evan Lars and Miri. Here we get to justice for Miri. In the book, Miri is a fun-loving girl, and in this restructure, she would be the same age as Dane. For this version, she needs a porcelain or ceramic figurine of some kind. A dolphin, a whale, a sea turtle, something that she wears as a pendant, or something as a charm on a wristband, or something braided out of the way into her hair. Needs to be something that associates with her family and identifies Miri to the reader. In the original, despite having one of the last conversations with Dane in the epilogue, Miri never gets mentioned again anywhere in this series or Tortallin World. That happens sometimes with side characters, but there is a missed opportunity with Miri that comes back when we get to Wolfspeaker. If you know what I'm talking about, you could leave a comment before you get to that part of the video where I will explain that change. In this chapter, Dane stops wearing the dresses that she salvaged from home and changes over to wear breeches. She remains the only protagonist of Tamara Pierce's who actively dislikes wearing dresses or petticoats or other gear that feminizes her. Dane helps with the new trainee rider selecting horses, and later that night discovers she cannot go to sleep in the women's dormitory. She moves her sleep things outside, where she is attacked at dawn by Jaina Bitterclaws and many other Stormwings. Horses, dogs, and birds rise to fight for Dane. Several other characters come charging out of the barracks to fight off the Stormwings, and among them is Numair, who had gotten a magical alert that the Stormwings were coming, and Alana and King John. At the end of the chapter, Anua takes Dane to meet the king. Chapter 5. John asks Dane personal questions about her paternity and family magic, which he gets away with because Dane is completely charmed with him. Numair ungracefully declares he knew Dane had magic, despite her insistence she does not. She is finally willing to hear it, that she has wild magic, and animals are drawn to her as they are to no other. Within the conversation, as it originally exists, Karthek's 2 years of failed crops are mentioned here, and part of Dane's willingness to accept that she has wild magic is because she's talked to Miri about sea people with dolphin or fish magic. The failed crops will be relevant again because this restructure has a specific reason the crops were ruined, and Miri has proven again a good age-mate friend to Dane. Numair begins right away to test the range of Dane's ability with the assistance of Cloud. But Dane feels her awareness start to slip away to join a nearby wolf pack, and that alarms her, so she ends the test. The next day, Cloud and Numair are able to test Dane's range while Dane is busy doing her work with the trainees. An issue I have with the original series, as I've indicated before, is how abruptly the romance side comes down in the 4th book. So, out of wild magic, Dane needs to trust Numair as a proven support and mentor without being confused over, do I want him, does he want me? This book needs to establish with Dane, first of all, that she is safe. With Numair, with Anua, with Alana, and with the riders, Dane needs to believe she has found a home after her family was murdered and her home burned and ripped away from her. I would de-emphasize overall Numair's teacher guardian role that the original has Numair occupy. Dane's wild magic is unique. Numair can provide animal anatomy books and he can guide a book-based curriculum. His role is to teach her to control and then assess her own abilities and skills. But he cannot answer everything, and she does not need him to act as her keeper for the next 4 years. This is where I feel the straddle of the middle grade young adult hurt the original. Dane didn't have a parent, and it's implied she lived a lot of that 13 to 16-year-old time frame at Numair's place, not with the Queen's Riders, not in chorus with Anua and a whole bunch of others. In this version, Dane is 15, and in this world, that is adult enough to let her be employed and trusted to take care of herself as she has proven she can. When she needs to serve Tortall beyond the Queen's Riders, Numair is already a spy when George and the King need him to be. So Dane can slide into that partner role in a genuine equal capacity, not as his student. The only reason to label Dane as Numair's student is kind of to shield them from scandal. Still talking about Chapter 5, A simple, but for me, necessary change. When Numair takes Dane out to the woods to show her the different magics present in all life, he needs to ask her permission, just get her consent, to use his gift through her to show her the different magics. It doesn't take much just to let her say, yes, that's fine, show me. He doesn't do that in the original, and at a minimum, that's rude. It is established in Lady Night that it's illegal to use magic on another person in Tortal without permission, and I assume that is not a brand new law. All he has to do is ask, and that's all I would put in there. At the end of their lesson, a water spirit, an Undine, emerges from the water, but Numair, reckless, scares it away with a bright flare of light. This is also where he originally bestows the pet name Magelet, and I intensely do not like that. The story, in my opinion, is vastly, unequivocally improved if he titles her Wild Mage instead. This passage explicitly ends in the original with Dane spitefully not pointing out a second Undine to Numair and thinking that she wasn't sure she liked being called Magelet. So we won't. After this, Dane starts to recognize wild magic in people around her, including Anua. She struggles with the deliberate part of her magic lessons with Numair, but he provides her books, and the restructure cuts out the part where he pokes her in the forehead because there's no reason to infantilize her like that. She does well in her lessons. She deeply enjoys learning. She would like the Badger God to return and answer some questions, but he is not doing so at this point. On to Chapter 6, the trainees learn that they will be headed to the coast for the last part of their summer training camp, and they will be going to Pirate Swoop. That is the home of Alana and her husband, Baron George Cooper. Accompanying the rider trainees will also be the Queen, because she likes to be involved with her irregulars whenever she has a chance. The night before they leave, Dane goes deeper in her meditation, and Cloud disrupts her before she loses her human sense. This triggers Dane to start resisting her magic lessons and meditation out of fear of going crazy again. On the road, conversations go into world building and laying out details about the conflict between Carthag and Tortal and the state of Tortal's defensives currently. When they reach the coast proper, Miri is delighted in her element, and Dane goes down to the water with the Queen. There, Dane hears wails through the water, but then she is almost killed by a bull sea lion who mistook her for another male based on his sense of her power. They make friends after Dane stops Numair from killing the sea lion in turn, and when the whales leap from the water, Miri identifies them for Dane and confirms that she did hear their song. Dane rejects meditation lessons again, disappointing Numair, for which she is feeling guilty. Toward the end of Chapter 6, worse than Numair neglecting to ask to use his gift through Dane, the Badger God forces Dane to tell Anua and Numair what happened to her family. He's taking away Dane's choice to tell them when she's ready. For the restructure, he can still be rude and insistent about being honest without smacking her on the head or knocking her down, physically pinning her, leaving claw marks in her shoulders until she can't breathe, until she promises to tell them. The point is made already in the original that she was seeking answers and he was not responding. And now we get to this part of the book and he is angry at her for not knowing things that he hasn't told her. This is consistent for his characterization. The problem that I have is that Dane always seems to just be okay with what he does, whether she defends her actions or not. The Badger doesn't apologize, and then he calls her a good girl when she agrees to tell her friends. He can be an asshole without doing any of the extra forceful things. He can just give her the information about why she needs to tell her friends what she's afraid of. He can tell her she's hurting herself and disrespecting her new friends by not showing them trust and telling her truth. I think that would work just fine. The rest of the chapter is Dane taking Anua and Numair aside to tell them, and the reader, all of what happened to her family, their home, how she thinks she went crazy, what she did to the bandits who killed her mother, and what her village tried to do to her after. Chapter 7 continues the conversation right after Dane has told Anua and Numair what happened, and in the original, Numair casts a barrier spell that essentially separates Dane's human essence from her wild magic power. I don't like that for several reasons. One, if that isn't soul magic, I don't know what is. And throughout Tamara Pierce's books, soul magic is not a good thing to be messing with. Numair may be a better mage than Blaise the Nothing Man, but from what I can see of soul magics, they're connected to their originators in a way that other spells aren't, and that's why they always break when the mage dies. And two, I don't like any implication that Dane's control of her power is completely dependent on the casting of Numair's spell. Something that occurred to me after I had finished this outline was that what's the difference between Numair's barrier between Dane in the original? What is the difference between Numair's barrier between Dane's human essence and her wild magic versus the barrier between the divine realms keeping the immortal creatures out and the mortal realms? In the original, it's pretty well implied that that mage-made barrier was never really supposed to be there, and I am fairly confident that whatever Numair's barrier is based on is the same type of magic, so it's the kind of thing that's never supposed to be there. With the restructure, he can still cast the barrier, but needs to make it clear right from the start that it is only a temporary fix. He will teach her control over her power so that it doesn't continue to leak into her human essence and into the sense of self that keeps her as Dane and not running off to become part of the closest pack or herd or flock. And narratively, this leakage should be, possibly is actually directly connected to Dane's recent experience of her family being murdered. Her rage at the lack of care from the other villagers is what snapped her away from her humanity, and she found connection instead with the local wolf pack. Her sense of identity shifted to someone who hunted humans and someone who was hunted by humans. She needs to regain control of her power properly and her understanding that she is intended to be human. I don't like Numair putting a permanent barrier around her human essence. If she was born with the mingling of her power and her essence, then that seems like the kind of interference that should cause significant consequence. Instead, in the original, it's just a perfect easy fix provided by Numair, and it takes self-control away from Dane. And back to the plot, the group continues down the coast to Pirate Swoop, and along the way, Dane heals an otter's broken paw and saves a dying rabbit. Between those, for this restructure, there can be a fight sequence similar to the one from Realms of the Gods with some newly arrived spydrins. Spydrins being 5 to 7 foot tall spider bodies with human heads and intelligence. And then for this, instead of Dane, Zelda can be caught in their web, and the rider trainees get to step up and rescue her and destroy the nest. This also gives Miri an unpaged chance to fight and demonstrate that she does belong in the riders. Zelda, in the original, is an almost nothing character who quits training when they're almost to the finish line for no clear reason. Seemingly, she's just fed up, and to be fair, it's possible she's been treated kind of poorly because she, apparently, had a poor attitude, but she didn't do anything actually wrong or mean before her parting words to Dane. Having her captured by spydrins is an extremely good reason to realize you don't actually want to risk your life like that and go home. And then, after healing the rabbit, Dane extends her magic further in a desire to meet dolphins, and she kills herself by stopping her heart to try and hear the dolphins clearer. The original sequence following has Dane walking up a foggy road to a hilltop where her parents wait. I don't think anything out of that brief exchange needs to shift. Readers are clever enough to connect that Ma with this man is probably Dane's father. He is a muscled, green and brown skinned man with horns growing out of his head. I would redo the setting so that it's still foggy, but the bits that Dane does see are the cottage house and garden that Sarah and Weirin seem to live in. Alana was luckily right nearby so that she is able to restart Dane's heart. But as Dane is being brought back to life, she also sees a Stormwing. Because she's emotional, she thinks that that's what's taking her Ma away. Numair is also emotional, and I wouldn't change anything about this scene for him. After thinking about it, Dane goes out to see if she can sense a real Stormwing and confirms that she can, and she alerts the decision makers of the group. Next comes the original conflict with Griffins, and after the battle with the Spydrins, the trainees would be ready to go. But it's different with the Griffins, and Dane can step in to negotiate where the Spydrins could not be negotiated with. For this restructure, the griffins can also include a mention of nearby centaurs that are moving in, who they should talk to before they start fighting. So this should make it clear from this point, if it wasn't before, not all immortals are enemies and monsters, but if mortals start the fight, immortals will do their best to finish it. Arriving at Pirate Swoop into Chapter 8, Dane enjoys the world she finds here. In addition to George and Alana's 3 small children, there is also the Crown Prince and Princess, Roald and Callison, or Callie. Dane and Alana have a conversation that I love about Stormwings and other immortals being properly the predators of humans, and that they weren't supposed to be locked away from the mortal realm in the first place. One morning, Dane wakes to Roald, Callie, and little Tom, who brought a wounded bird for her to heal. And from there, they follow Dane everywhere because she will show them all sorts of animals. At some point, they come across a Darking. It's enough like the Undine, and it imitates the children without doing anything else. It's not that weird to any of them that there is another immortal creature that none of them know anything about. But at least this one is friendly and nice, even if it looks like a moving shadow. In the original, the Darkings name themselves as such. It's not clear if that came from Ozorn or not. And for this restructure, Callie or Tom can name it a Darking first. By showing kindness, the 4 of them have unknowingly begun to change this Darking's perspective and that of its connected kin. Immediately after, before they get a chance to mention that Darking to any other adult or mages, the messenger comes for Alana and soldiers. They receive a report that ogres have killed another lord who's some days' ride away, and the rest of the family is locked inside of the keep and unable to get out. So Alana and some soldiers need to go deal with those ogres for them. Since the Darking was completely inoffensive, none of them feel compelled to tell, and it's easily forgotten in all that follows. Then, Dane wakes up that night to bats having been frightened out of their roosts by humans moving into the woods in the dark. She reports to George what the bats tell her, and then they all realize Pirate Swoop has been surrounded. Chapter 9 is titled Siege, and a siege commences. The stated aims of the apparent pirates is taking as hostages Thayet and her children. As the defenders wait, spells have been set by the enemy to dampen the magic of those inside the castle. Numair has the power to resist the dampeners or else to raise them so that others can work their lesser magic. I love the moment Numair says to Dane, "I'm scared," and all the vulnerability and trust that is shared between them in that moment. He raises the dampeners to allow the battle mages that are better than him to fight. Throughout the battle, part of Dane's attention is pulled away to stop the local animals from participating in the battle. This would not be a typical animal's inclination. Her presence is drawing them to want to defend her, and she doesn't want them to die. During a break in the battle, that break is ended when a young dragon, enraged, roars over the castle. Dane is able to connect to her mentally, and then when she physically touches the female dragon, she learns that the dragon was pregnant. The baby was just killed when the dragon was unintentionally pulled through the portal to the battle at Pirate Swoop, and that Dane's wild magic is being pulled out of her to revive the baby. The dragon leaves in a hurry, and Dane passes out soon afterward. This chapter ends with Sarge's life in danger, and that is different once you've read Tempest and Slaughter, knowing the extent of his history with Numair. Numair's reaction should be slightly intensified from what it originally is to indicate some of this. And finally, we reach Chapter 10. It begins with Anua persuading Dane to let her animal friends do something, even if it's not to let them fight, rather than continue to exert her power and her will to control them. So, Dane gives the local wildlife some quick guidance in guerrilla tactics to disable the raiders and pirates. When Dane gets the idea to ask the whales to come tip the ships, George shows her a rig that they've used before to secret someone down the cliffside to the beach. The whales, however, could not be less interested in fighting. When Dane still tries to persuade them, for the restructure, a dialogue line can be added in, something like, "Not even when the Queen of Chaos rises to eat us all, we will not fight even then." Chaos with a capital C, I haven't said Chaos with a capital C. When the whales leave, Dane is drawn deeper and deeper into the ocean until she finds a kraken, who is more than happy to come to Pirate Swoop and eat some ships. The young dragon mother had the ability to listen in on Dane's conversation with the whales, and when Dane is struggling to get back from the beach, the dragon comes down and gives her a lift. The dragon turns then to participate in the battle, and unfortunately she is killed. We would learn from Realms of the Gods she was the equivalent of a 16-year-old among the dragons. She sends Dane a strange vision of a cave with a glowing light before she dies. Shortly after that, the kraken arrives, and everything on land comes to a halt as everyone watches the forest of tentacles spring up around the raider fleet. Jaina Bitterclaws is not distracted, attacks Dane. Cloud then does some unexpected magic, transferring a surge of strength to Dane that enables her to shoot down the Stormwing Queen. This bit of magic is rather random and inexplicable in the overall world of Tortall. I think it might make as much sense if it's Dane's connection to Cloud that gives Cloud this option, not as something where any random animal could choose to convey power to other mortals. And then there is the epilogue. Dane already has a conversation in there with Miri in the stables before she goes to find and rescue the baby dragon from her glowing cave dream vision. This restructure can add in some kind of exchange along the lines of, "I'm glad you were here with me. I'm glad we both made it through our first battle together." Foreshadowing. But that would be it for Wild Magic. Dane goes and finds the baby dragon. That is her responsibility. But Anua says, "I don't see how that is going to stop you from helping me with the horses." So Dane still has a home, even though she now is fostering a dragon baby. Wolfspeaker, Book 2. Possibly, pretty sure this one is my favorite of the 4 Immortals books. Something about it, the scale of it, just sits right for me, especially among this quartet that should be a trilogy. This book reflects more of the internal changes that are for Dane, as opposed to the next book, which is going to splice more pieces of Realms of the Gods into the plot of Emperor Mage. Wild Magic took place from the spring through the summer. Wolfspeaker occurs in the autumn of the following year, so a year and a half older. For this version, Dane is 16 and getting closer to 17. Numair is recast as formerly her teacher in gaining control of her power. Now they are something of traveling partners in service to the king. This book opens originally in the point of view of Brokefang, the leader of the pack that Dane ran with to avenge her mother's murder, and who subsequently were run out of the area where they and Dane used to live. Now they have settled at Long Lake, and he had sent 2 wolves to find Dane and help them stop the resident humans of Long Lake from destroying the area. His deep exposure to her magic the spring of the year before has changed the structure of his mind. The scene shifts to Dane, and she is pensive as she and Numair are close to meeting up with Brokefang, and when Numair asks what's on Dane's mind, she mentions Anua as a diversion in the original, but she is important to Dane entering and establishing herself in Tortall, and she would have been the one with whom she spent most of the last year and a half working. I would let this conversation linger and actually build an idea of who Anua is for Dane at this point. She is a friend and an elder sister who's been left behind. They discuss the barrier spell that Numair used on Dane to separate her human essence from her wild magic because she's concerned being near the wolf pack will bring her back to that. I think a better version is that the spell has dissipated as it was intended to. I'm gonna keep going. If that rain and thunder gets loud, I might have to take a break. The barrier spell has dissipated as it was intended to, as Dane gained control over herself, over the influence of her traumas on her sense of self and on her power. Numair can tell her that if they need it again, he will cast the spell again, but he has confidence in her now and in her going forward. I think that's a better narrative and a better relationship than the original, which is literally almost, my power is great, trust it, trust me if you don't trust yourself. Doubling down on Cloud and Dane as a sister bond, Cloud here is grumpier than usual because she misses Anua too, and this is a perfect opening for Dane to tease her about Aw and even Tahoe. Another reason that Dane and Numair are in the northeastern and mountainous region of Tortal is because one troop of soldiers and one group of Queen's Riders has gone missing in the area. Originally, the 9th Rider group went missing in the spring, and the soldiers went missing in July. Switch those so it goes from a big noisy group first to a medium-sized irregular group that went second, and now that's why there are 2 unusual and powerful infiltrators being deployed to investigate. Adding in here, Dane is worried about mischievous Miri. She was assigned to the 9th Rider group, and Dane is refusing to think that the worst has happened. In this restructured version, there have been more frequent conflicts and a greater variety of Immortals, so Dane's internal reflection can adapt to how much she and Numair have worked together to combat or negotiate with Immortals for the peace of the realm, and how doing this has gradually drawn her away from her work with Anua and with the Queen's Riders. Then they meet up with Brokefang, and the wolf pack meets Skysong, nicknamed Kitten, the baby dragon that Dane is raising. At some point when Brokefang is explaining why they settled in Dunlath and the Long Lake, he can mention that a sunbird flew over on the evening that they arrived, sort of settling the wolf's decision. This can startle Numair a little bit. The Badger God then makes an appearance in the physical world for the first time, interacting with Dane's companions as well as with Dane. Here he can be forthright with Dane about her father. As I've said, there is truly no relevant reason to be coy about her parentage. There was no reason for Sarah to keep it so completely secret the way she did, especially even in the original. Dane was 12 at the point that Sarah was killed. I think she could have told Dane something. The only reason that I think Dane would resist hearing this from the Badger is because it hurts that her mother, who should have been the one to tell her, didn't and can't now. This meeting wouldn't be the first time that Dane's father he's brought up Dane's father with her, but they are actually in Weirin's lands now, and he thinks this wouldn't be and he thinks that's worth both her and Numair being aware of. Soft hint that Dane misses. Dane's power evolves over this book, and the Badger sets her on the path to shapeshift here because he's surprised she hadn't gotten there already herself. This makes more sense than it doesn't, I think, if in the last book she was concerned just her mind could be lost to becoming an animal. How much deeper could this fear touch if she had considered physically becoming one? The way the original text from the Badger reads, it is possible he meant for her to understand that he meant shapeshifting, but he doesn't say exactly that. Tweaking the text just slightly would make it both more clear he meant shapeshifting and also make it clearer exactly how Dane and Numair misunderstand. The original text, if you try, you can learn to enter the mind of a mortal animal. You can use their eyes as you would your own, or their ears, or their noses. Make your mind like that of the animal you join. Think like that animal does until you become one. You may be quite surprised by what results in the end. He's expecting her to shapeshift, but he is telling her mind meld. But you could rewrite it to, you must learn to enter the mind of a mortal animal. Their eyes, their ears, their noses become yours. Make your mind like that of the animal. Think like that animal does until you become one. You may be quite pleased by what results. Until you become one, until you become one. That kind of wordplay is where they read the mind meld when he does mean shapeshift. Particularly, I would remove if you try. The original exchange as above, he says if you try, and at the end of his explanation, Dane's answer is, I'll try, and he retorts, do better than try. To me, my edit makes more sense if he's saying do better than try because he said she must. The Badger God allows Numair to ask a few questions about the Immortals and the barrier, but the Badger isn't interested, and he thinks why should he or the gods be interested in that mortal barrier? They have enough to do on top of constantly fighting back the Goddess of Chaos. Originally, Dane is asking if the Badger God knows who breached the barrier. I think he knows that it's Ozorn at this point. I think it should be clear that he's just looking for the god to confirm his hypothesis, but the badger will not. After the badger leaves, Numair can immediately be blamed for misleading Dane and himself into interpreting the badger's advice to Dane to mean a mind meld thing, a magical symbiote, as he says, rather than a thing to change Dane's shape. The fact that Dane's initial attempt to mind meld with Cloud hurt Cloud should have clued them in that it wasn't quite right. They hypothesize that it has to do with the sort of prey-predator or grass-eater, meat-eater dichotomy, so the way Dane gets around that is to try next with a wolf brain, a predator brain, but that dichotomy never poses any problem again. The scene ends with Numair sending Dane to rest, even though he cooked dinner and her responsibility would be to clean up. I think that's an original and decent moment to showcase their experience and trust with each other as they've traveled and managed the necessary tasks associated with camping. The next day, the wolves lead Dane and Numair to their cave and the pups that are guarded there. Along the way, Dane and Numair duck to take cover from a patrol of Stormwings that they are not expecting. Dane has a violent hatred of Stormwings, but Numair is urging her to be less vengeful. These Stormwings haven't done anything to them. Shortly after that, getting to the end of chapter 1, they find the exploded crater and the remains of the 9th Rider group. In this restructure, among the remains is a ceramic or porcelain figurine, a dolphin or something like it, an item associated with Miri to identify her body here. This is the missed opportunity for a character who otherwise just vanishes from the page. When Dane tries to pick up the correct ornament, it shatters completely. This can add a keen undercurrent of grief and pain that is already briefly implied, but mostly missing from the original, a direct reason for Dane to look towards revenge again. This change would require cutting or modifying Numair's final comment to Dane in the chapter to something gentler that can carry the same sentiment. It can simply be him pointing out that Stormwings don't have the magic to do this, and it hurts her more than them if she chooses to be closed-minded and intolerant. Chapter 2. The wolves continue the journey to lead Dane and Numair to their cave, and they get an overview of the lake, of the Fife's castle, and they see that the guard posts have more soldiers than what the law would allot for a castle of Dunlot's size. The humans meet the pack's pups when they get there, and then they guard them while the rest of the pack goes hunting. When they return, Dane tries the mind meld thing with Brokefang with more success. The next morning, Numair informs Dane that there's an occult net shielding the valley, and it will catch any major magic that he tries to cast. Something is going on in Dunlath that isn't adding up. Brokefang takes them to an area of mining and deforestation operation, and there Dane sees both enslaved humans and enslaved ogres, looking away when one of the ogres is whipped. Slavery has been outlawed in Tortall for several hundred years at this point. Numair has the knowledge that opals used to be mined in the Dunlath area, and he speculates that new opal dirt may have been discovered. From the realms of the gods, there is a brief exchange about what indigenous means when discussing local rock formations. That same little vocabulary bit could fit here, and it allows the one joke that Numair shares about his father. As with the original, Numair makes a decision that they will go into the village to talk to people to gather information. Dane hunts and originally has an internal recollection about talking to Princess Callison about how she hunts, even though the animals are her friends. I would just take this reflection out, and if a reader is concerned about the same thing, they can wonder about it for a bit. This complete same conversation can be had later with Mora. Returning from hunting, and after more conversation with Brokefang, Dane is worried that the pack is going to end up hunted and eliminated by the resident humans. The next day, splicing in a scene from the realms of the gods, Dane helps Numair by holding a mirror while he shaves, because he is so awkwardly tall, and because he's vain, he doesn't want to be scruffy when they go into town. The sequence with the innkeeper can remain as it is. It does the job it's intended to of Numair broadcasting the boundaries of their relationship. Unfortunately, he does turn around and force Dane to wear a dress in answer to the invitation to meet and dine with the nobles of the castle. There is even a reasonable explanation for why he insists she wear a dress, but he doesn't give it in the book, and so to restructure it, he can simply explain that a young woman in a dress is much more easily overlooked than a young woman in breeches, and he needs her to be overlooked by these people. Dane can grudgingly agree with that. Arriving at the castle, Dane and Numair meet the Lord Belden, the Lady Yolaine, and her younger sister Mora. Here, Dane is startled when Numair introduces her as his student. It's for the same reasons as the dress, but he didn't mention it to her. They also meet the huntmaster who works for the fief. His dogs like Dane. She is inclined to dislike the hunter, knowing he definitely kills wolves, but every actual interaction with him, Tate, builds him up with Dane, starting with the happiness and loyalty of his dogs. In the transition to chapter 3, when Tate leaves, in walks a former frenemy of Numair's, Tristan Staghorn. In light of tempests and slaughter, nearly everything that Tristan says is backhanded, projecting, or a plain lie. For the restructure, Yolaine flirting more openly with Numair would throw light on several dynamics. Her and her husband, her and Tristan, Tristan and Numair and Dane, who is seated farther away with young Mora, able to observe this interplay throughout dinner while they talk. Some mice come over to beg from Dane, and she discovers a Darking among them, imitating the mice, squeaking like them, and accepting bits of bread and cheese. Mora doesn't know what it is either, and so Dane tells her it's a Darking because that's what Callie or Tom had named it. As with the original, you get to the end of the meal, Dane stands in front of the table of nobles and mages to speak for the wolves. Numair in the original first shakes his head in a kind of not now, and then rudely points her back to her seat. Dane ignores him, and he changes tact to support her openly to stand beside her. With the restructure, a head shake is enough. When it's clear from that first moment that she will not back down, he can just support her without trying to control her further. He already put her in a dress and the sub-role of student, and then let her be sat at the kids' table with Mora, even though she is the wild mage. So, Dane explains the conditions of the forest and the lake to Yolaine due to the mining and logging operations, that she is there because the wolves asked her to speak for them to the humans before they did something themselves to stop the operations. Unexpectedly, the Huntmaster Tate also backs up Dane's claims about the degradation of the lake and the forest and why Yolaine and Tristan need to stop. They are mocking and dismissive of Dane for multiple reasons. It is looking like night now. I guess I gotta do it. Suddenly, a light appeared. The Huntmaster Tate also backs up Dane's claims about the degradation of the lake and the forest and why Yolaine and Tristan need to stop. The adults are mocking and dismissive of Dane for multiple reasons, but as far as Dane is concerned, the wolves have asked her to speak for them to the humans, and she won't disappoint them by saying she was too scared to talk. Numair and Dane return to the inn in the village, where Kitten has been sullenly waiting alone, but after midnight, Numair wakes Dane to leave. Tristan lied about all the other mages that he introduced to Dane and Numair at dinner, and also drugged Numair's wine, but Numair managed to avoid it. He explains after they have left that Tristan is a war mage absolutely in service to the Emperor Ozorn, and King John needs to be alerted at once. Dane now has a specific personal reason to hate Tristan for almost certainly being the one to destroy the Ninth Rider group and Miri. Numair's next decision is for them to immediately leave the valley to get out of the occult net so he can send a message. He buries something at a crossroads without explaining to Dane, something to cover their escape once they are discovered missing. When the wolf pack gets closer, Dane insists on meeting with them against Numair's urgency. He yields to wait because his spells let him know that their absence is known. He releases the things he buried at the crossroads and explains that they are simulacra riding in opposite directions from the two of them and clumsily shielded in a way to look like two people that are undercover. Numair expects that Tristan will expect him to be inefficient at practical magics because when they were in school together, Numair, as he claims, knew nothing practical. The Darking is discovered here, most likely having stowed away on the hem of Dane's borrowed dress and then getting into her saddlebags. Numair senses it as foreign magic as he releases his own magic towards the crossroads. Dane warns him to be gentle and tells him what she recognizes of it and that she just plain forgot to mention it after all that happened last summer at Pirate Swoop. The Darking squeaks and bobs and still acts like a mouse without looking like one and can become a mild hanger-on until needed. Broke Fang is in mental distress when they meet up with Dane and Numair. He can tell that they are leaving, but the only human he's interested in dealing with is Dane. It's hard for him to see how going away to another human is going to help stop the ones that are in the valley. His brain is changing more because of this new exposure with Dane's magic. Dane doesn't want to leave Broke Fang, not if she can help him, and not if Numair does not need her to get a message to the king. I do not like how Numair attempts to guilt trip Dane and then threatens to force her to come along with him. Happily, Dane doesn't even flinch and stands her ground, and he does understand her motive, even if her being in danger is what makes him lose his temper this way. This chapter end is where we introduce the restructured romance of this trilogy. The original has no undercurrent of longing or a sense of attraction, and this is a perfect moment. Dane feels a tug at the impending loss of reliable comfort and support. Numair is leaving his partner, friend, student in danger, but also respecting her responsibility, proud of her for choosing honor, understanding, and here rises in him the urge to stay with her, not prioritize getting out from under the occult net. They could still send a messenger bird, it's just not as fast. Instead of saying, I can make you go with me, Numair can say, I can stay. And Dane says, go. The yearning begins. Cut. I think it's going to rain big here now. This is the second time I have grabbed this instead of the mouse.